Hi, I'm Jillybean Fitzhenry, and welcome to another one of my acrylic painting tutorials. Now, all of my pattern packets are available on my website, www.jillybean.net, and they're available either as a printed version or a download. Also, I would really appreciate it if you like this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Jillybean Fitzhenry, and give me a like so that I can continue to do more. I'm going to start the project by prepping my little wood ornament, and I like to use the Dynasty Faux Squirrel for doing my base coating. It really does have some soft bristles, yet there's a lot of them, so it really gets the job done quickly for me. The color that I'm going to start to base coat with is the DecoArt Traditions Medium White. I like to use kind of a neutral color because I use this to seal the wood piece and then sand, and then I have a neutral color underneath all the other colors for the design. Once the wood piece is dry, take some fine sandpaper and just lightly sand so that it's a little bit smoother. And just take your hand and kind of rub across so that you can see that it's smooth enough. It's a good idea to print your pattern out on vellum paper, which is a heavier type of tracing paper, and this you can get at most office supply stores. I'm going to just cut some of the excess off around the pattern so that I don't have quite so much to deal with. And then I'm going to tape that onto the top of my piece with just a little bit of Scotch Magic tape. Line it up. When you use vellum and print it out of your printer instead of hand tracing it, the pattern is going to be a little bit more accurate, because every time you trace over something, you change the design slightly. Okay, then I'm going to use graphite paper, which is like an artist type of carbon paper, and I will slip that under and in between, and then I'm going to transfer all the main parts of my design on using a stylus. I always take a quick look to make sure that I can see that I've got the graphite paper going the right direction. I'm going to use something similar to like the turquoise blue for my background. And I'll just use a black gold 3/8 inch angle to put that on. And I do want a good coverage. You might need 2 coats. Get right up next to the rest of the design. Base coat the face in with Flesh Tone, and this is an Americana color. The hand is also flesh tone, and I'm either going to just use a round brush or the pointed round end of my Jillybean Dirty Dancer. The hat and the coat I base coated in with the Burgundy Americana, or I mean the Deco Art Traditions. The teddy bear's sweater is also the turquoise blue. I'm going to use the Traditions Burnt Sienna to base in all of the fur, including the bear and the hat. This time I'm going to add a little bit of water to it. And I'm going to try to pull kind of in the direction that you see the fur is growing or extending from each of the areas. This is still just your base coat, so it doesn't need to be real detailed. I'm going to use yellow-green light in the Traditions to fill in the very top and bottom area of the ornament. As long as it looks like you've got a solid coat on your face, you can get away with one coat. If that looks a little skimpy, do stop and put another coat on there and then blow dry it again. Otherwise, go ahead, put your tracing pattern back on top, line it up, and then I'll want to slip my graphite under, and I only want to get the face transferred on. And I definitely like using a thin stylus for this. If you try doing this with a pencil or a pen, you're going to get really thick lines, and you want to try to keep this as dainty as possible. To work on the face, I'm going to be using my Jillybean Dirty Dancer. This has a dome blender on one side and a pointed round on the other. And I use it to do all of my shading and highlighting. And then I also will want a little detail brush. I really love the Dynasty Black Gold 20-aught script. I can get a nice fine little point for all those little teeny eyelashes. I'm going to be showing you how to do an extender blending technique to work on the face. And hopefully, if you don't like floating color, you just might like this technique. So I'm going to be using the DecoArt Extending Blending Medium in the Traditions, and I have a little cup. Oh, it comes with a little seal, so I do need to take that off. Little piece of paper, or I can either peel that off, or another thing that I do like to do is, let's put this back on, I can take my stylus and just poke it down in the hole and then be able to pour my extender into my little cup. Now the extender lasts for a long time in this little cup. If I don't cover this, it'll last for weeks and weeks and weeks. I usually spill it before I end up using all of it. I I do want to start with a few little outlines first, so I will go back to my little script brush. And I want to get the eyes, which are going to start out with that turquoise blue. You don't need much. And I'm going to want some carbon black for the pupils. And I'll need some titanium white for in the corners of the eyes. Now the brush is new, so I am going to rinse it in water first and blot it on my paper towel. And I'll start with turquoise blue, and I'm just going to scoop up a little bit on the tip. This is such a teeny little eye to be working in. You could also try to find the wooden end of a brush that would be just the right size. Dip it in and then touch the brush down, the little wooden end of the brush. So fill that in, nice round circle. And then I'm going to test the wooden end of this, see how big. That might be too big for the, that's going to be a little too big for the pupil. So I'm going to use my stylus, dip it into the black, and then dip that down. Now if it's too little, I'm just going to give it just a little slight rotation, which will help make that circle a little bit bigger. Okay, and then the corners of the eyes are filled in with the titanium white. And I try to make the corners a little bit more rounded instead of so pointy. It makes them look a little more natural. And I went into my blue just a little bit, so I'm going to go back and add just a little bit more blue in there. And I'll let those dry a little bit. I'll start with a little bit of outlining, and I'm going to use the Americana Shading Flesh. Now I may get a little bit darker outlines later, but this will be easy to cover in case I need to change it. So I will thin this with just a little bit of water. And I'll outline the nostrils so I remember where they are, and this helps to already start to cover up the graphite lines. Try not to get this tip of the nose where the little openings of the nostrils are. Try not to get that too big. You don't want to draw a lot of attention to that area. Now, And I know definitely the smile line that goes through the lips is going to need to be darker after, but this will just remind me where it is. And the little line above the eye, it doesn't touch the eye, just going right over that little graphite line. So there's a space between this line and the eye itself. The inside of the ears can just be filled in with this color. I'm going to actually start with the highlights on the face to begin with. And for that I'm going to use the Americana Highlight Flash. Okay, now I want to moisten the face carefully with some extender. And I'm going to start with my double-ended brush by dipping both ends of it into the extender, and then I wipe it off on my paper towel. So both ends, and wipe it off on the paper towel. Now, the amount that you still have on the blender is usually just the right amount to go ahead and use to moisten an area, and it is easier to just do one area at a time. So I want to get some highlight in the center of the cheek. So I've got extender, and you do want to kind of tip your piece. You'll get a little bit of a shine, and you want to make sure that there's no puddles. You just want to see shine. If you get puddles, you're going to want to blot it with your paper towel. Then I'm going to pick up the highlight flesh, and I really pat that down into the bristles of that pointed round. And I'm going to make a fairly good size circle, and I want this to be pretty solid in the center. Then I flip my brush around and use the blender, and I just barely catch that outside edge. I'm doing a really gentle, delicate little blend. Just soft, soft. And I don't want to go into the middle of it. Every once in a while I'll stop and I'll soften my brush on my paper towel. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to re-dip in the extender and blot it all off. And I do rinse my brush in water in between colors, but then always re-dip it in extender and wipe it off on your paper towel. So moisten that cheek. And then use the pointed round. Pick up the highlight color, and I may need to do 2 coats. Sometimes when it dries it gets a little too transparent. Flip the brush over and just softly, softly catch that outside edge. Any residue on the brush, wipe it off on your paper towel so that you're not just spreading color. Okay, I dipped it in extender just because I need to re-moisten some more. So I'll do the nose next. And I want to get the tip of the nose is like a round ball, so I want to get the top of that round ball. And soften that edge. And soften the top as well. And I can actually even pull a little bit up in the center. In fact, I'm going to actually make a little bit in the center for the bridge of the nose, but then soften each side so there's no hard edge. And put a little on the top of the nostrils, just a little bit of a curve. Use the blender to soften. And I'm just softening the underside of it this time. I don't mind if there's a little more of a hard edge on the top of the nostril there. And I'm not coming all the way along the side, I'm just trying to hit that top corner. Let's add just a little bit more on the center again. Okay, and then I want a little bit of this color above the eyes, between the line and the eyelid crease, but it's just a line, so I'm going to switch to my script brush. And it's just filled in. This is your eyelid. And I see just a little spot on his pupil that I want to touch in. There we go. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and outline the eyes, and I'm going to use burnt umber. And I'm going to thin it with water. The only time I use extender to thin color is if I need to blend it. But when I'm outlining, for like on the eyelids, I don't need to blend the line, so it's okay for it to dry a little faster. So just kind of doing the perimeter of the eye. Remember to try to keep the corners a little bit more rounded. And if you need to go back and do any little bit of cleanup, you sure can. So if I fill in too much in the corners, I'll go back and put a little white back in. Or if I go, beyond the area too much, I can always use the flesh and clean that up a little bit. So I'm going to get just a little bit of white and touch in this outside corner here. Okay, and then while I have the white on my brush, I'm going to add a little bit of extender into the white. And I'm going to do the highlight in the eye. Just in that little bottom area of blue. And then I'll use the blender to just softly catch where I stopped, just so it is a little bit softer, not quite so abrupt. So a little extender to thin your white. Right in the middle of the blue on the bottom there. And just gently catch that little outside edge. I'm just going to touch up my outline on the outer side of the nostril here too. Okay. Then I want a little darker color in the top of the blue of the eyes. So I'm going to use the Traditions Phthalo Blue. And I'm going to just tuck it up in the very top corners, and then I can also use that to outline the sides or the edges of the blue. And you may need to add a little touch of water to get a skinny line. If it was a larger eye, I'd be doing more blending, but because it's so little, it's just basically some outlining. And just making sure that that top little corner of the blue is a little darker. Just raise that eyelid up just a little bit on that one side. Okay, and then inside the eye is a little teeny dot of white for a highlight inside the pupil. And I just use the tip of the brush, but you could also use a stylus if it's small enough. Okay, and then I'm going to use burnt umber and the liner brush to do the eyebrows. Real thin little lines. And try not to overdo the eyebrows too much. You don't want them too huge on a little child. So teeny tiny little lines, and I start where I'm kind of pointing towards the nose, and then I pivot and start pulling these little lines back. A little more water in that burnt umber. Same on the other side. Sometimes it's easier to turn it upside down to do the opposite side. You'll know when it feels awkward. So if I take a little bit of this Naphthol Red Light, let's try the flesh tone actually. And I think it's equal parts, looks good. So a little scoop of the flesh tone and a little scoop of the Naphthol Red Light. And I'm going to use that for his bottom lip. And I'm just going to fill that in. I'm just using the round brush side of my Dirty Dancer. A little pointed round. Okay, now the lip on top, I want it to be even softer, so I'm going to add one more scoop of the flesh tone into that mix, because I don't want his top lip to look quite as dominant. It makes it a little less feminine looking if you just over accent the bottom lip, not so much on the top. Okay, then on the bottom lip, I do want to add a little bit of darker on each side, and I'm going to just use the Naphthol Red Light, and I'm going to put a little bit of extender into it. Because my base coat is still wet, I don't want to add extender onto the lip right now, because I would end up just kind of wiping it off. So I'm going to put a little bit on the edge, and then while those two colors are still wet, I just barely catch that inside edge to soften it. Same on the other side. Just get a little bit in that corner and just gently touch with the blender. I can also add a little highlight in there while that's all wet. Now I washed my brush in water, but I always have to redip it in extender again if I'm doing the blending method. Okay, and I can use either the highlight flesh, or I could use white. Let's try the highlight flesh. Oh, and I did, when I was mixing the medium red rose color, I did say flesh tone. I meant to say highlight flesh. So equal parts of highlight flesh and Nephthol red light are what I used to mix the medium red rose color. So the highlight flesh in the center for the highlight, and then just soften the edges. And I'm not going to do anything to that top lip. I'm going to leave that top lip just very pale so that it doesn't stand out very much. Okay, then I'm ready for my shadows. I still might want to punch up my highlights, but I don't know until after I get all my shadows in there. So I'm going to make sure my brush is clean, but then redip it in extender, both ends, and wipe them off on the paper towel. But this time I'm actually, because I've got such small areas and I want to be careful that I don't mess into the highlights, I'm actually just going to add some extender into my shading flesh color. Soften that up. I still want it to be a solid color. I don't want it to be too transparent necessarily. And if that ends up being too dark for you, you can actually take a little bit of flesh tone. In fact, let me put a little bit out because just in case I need for touch-ups. In fact, let's do that. Let's take just a little scoop of the flesh tone. Let's maybe just kind of do half and half. You'll get a little bit softer shadow that way. So flesh tone and shading flesh, half and half. And then I have extender in here. Okay, and I'm going to start with the sides of the face. And I just lay the color down all the way down the side of the face. Flip my brush and just catch that outside edge, and I'm going the length of the face. I don't want to be pulling it in. I just want to soften that hard edge down the length of the face. Now, if you wipe too much of it off, just go ahead right away and put some more back on. Try it again. And gentle touch as you're blending. Wipe the excess off on your paper towel in between. Don't worry if you go into the bare a little bit, that's all going to get cleaned up afterwards. I'll do the same thing on the other side of the face. And then soften. Wipe your excess off on the paper towel. Now I have a little bit that I got into the shirt, and I can either take extender or just water on my brush and just wipe that out. Clean that right up. And you may also find that it's easier when you do one side over the other. It might be easier to go ahead and turn it upside down to do the other side. Just kind of play with it a little bit. Just soft, soft touch. Okay. Then there's also, between the nose and the lips, there's a little divot, and that actually just gets filled in. You don't even have to blend that. You're going to also want to put some under the lips. So just kind of paint it in with your round, then use the blender to soften that hard edge on the bottom. And I'm already seeing that I need it to be just a little bit darker, so I'm putting a little bit more of the shading flesh in that mix. Otherwise, I'm wiping too much of it away. Okay, then I also want to do above the eyes. So same shading color, and I go above that eyelid crease line. And then I just want to soften the top of that. I can leave the hard edge where it touches the line. Do that on both sides of the eyes. And if you have to go back and put, that highlight flesh between them again, you sure can. Okay, then I also want to do the same color. It's continuing on down, and I continue down until I run into the top of the nostril. Okay, and then soften that. And you want to soften the edge in the bridge of the nose here also. Okay, then I'm going to go on the outside edge of the nostril. If I aim for the outside edge of the nostril when I first come down, this would be too wide. So I come in and then I go around. And soften. I really find that I like this extender blending technique much better than the old way that I used to float color when I would do the faces. I think this is a lot easier to get your areas blended, especially when you're doing center areas. You can kind of play in it a little bit more. Soften. Just remember there's no hard edges coming down the bridge of the nose here, so you've got to soften both sides. Sometimes I'll do a highlight under the eye, and sometimes I'll do a little bit of a shadow. It just depends on the face. So you can decide which you think that you want. I'm going to make it a little bit darker right here in that top corner. Okay, and then also the very tops of the ears. And soften. And remember, I just have extender in my brush now. I'm not putting extender on the surface anymore. It works by just adding it into your color and on your brush. Okay, and then I'll rinse my brush. And I am going to touch up that little bit above the one eye with the highlight flesh. Okay, so I think I will put just a little bit of highlight under here. So I'm going to just, at this point, just take a little extender and add that into my highlight flesh color. And I'm going to draw a little line. And then I'll use the blender to just soften that bottom edge. Same thing on the other eye. And then soften. Okay, and then I want to get the bottom of the ears. Get a little highlight on there. Highlight flesh. And then soften that top. Same on the other ear. Okay, now I do see that I want to just do a little bit more of a coat in the center of the cheeks. So this time I'm just adding the extender into the color, which was the highlight flesh, because I want that to be, the center to be solid without any brush marks in the very middle. And then I want to soften around the edges. So it may take a couple coats to do that. And it doesn't hurt sometimes to go ahead if you're, struggling with something. Go ahead, use your hair dryer and blow it dry and try it again. So you can always wipe it off, try it again. Just soft, soft touch. Okay, I want to get a little darker in the inside tops of the ears. There again, I'm just going to put some extender into some burnt umber. And I just inside the ear, but the top half. And then soften that with the blender. And then we can also do the cheek color, which is the Naphthol Red Light and Highlight Flesh Mix, which was my medium red rose. Medium red rose is a color that they used to make, but they discontinued it. And then I'm just going to add extender into that, because I don't want to moisten the face. Once I've got wet areas, I don't want to be putting down any more extender on the surface. So I'm just going to put it on the outside of the cheek. And yes, it's right on top of where there was already some shadow. And then soften that. Now, if you could have seen his chin, which is covered by the teddy bear, it would have had a little bit of blush on it also. Okay, and then I do like to put just a little bit on the bottom tip of the nose. Kind of a little curve. And soften. And I'm not going to put any on the nostrils. I'm going to leave those alone. Okay, then I'm ready to go ahead and clean up my outline through the center of my mouth, and that's the burnt umber, and I'm just going to use water to thin it because I'm not needing to blend it. And I added just little curves on each end of that smile line also. Don't outline the lips because that'll just make them look dirty. You want to kind of leave those as is. For above the eye and next to the nostril, a lot of times I do like to deepen that just a little bit. So I would use burnt sienna. And you don't need much. And I'm just going to use extender to loosen that up, thin it down a little bit. And I could either use my liner brush or I can just carefully use the point on my pointed round here, which is what I'm going to do. But if it's easier for you to go ahead and switch to a liner to put this on, you sure could. I just want a thin line above the eye and soften it. I'm not going to come down the bridge of the nose. I just want that a little darker above the eyes. And then a little bit on the outside edge of the nostrils. And I haven't waited for any of the areas to dry before doing the next. I just keep going because it's okay to, as long as you're doing soft blending, to lay all the colors in. And then he's ready for some eyelashes. And if you feel that you want to outline, like the edges of the ears and the face, you can do that. Either burnt sienna or burnt umber, little liner brush. So if you feel you want to clean that up, and if I was doing a little bit more realistic, I would not add these outlines because you wouldn't really see this on a real face. Okay, eyelashes can be black, and I'm only going to put eyelashes on the very top, and I'm just using water to thin my black, half and half. Half paint, half water. Use the little liner brush. And eyelashes are longer to the outside and they get shorter as they come in towards the nose. And they just kind of little gentle curve to the outside of the face. And you can either pull from the inside out or the outside in. And there again, sometimes turning your piece upside down to do the opposite side might make it a little bit more comfortable. And then sometimes I do need to add just a little bit darker line across the top of the eye itself too. It helps set those lashes in just a little bit better. And there we have the face. Next, I'm going to work on the hat just a little bit, and for that you need a 1/4 inch angle brush, and there again I love the black gold. This one has a really nice sharp chisel edge. Now for doing the little strokes that are in the hat and the sweater, I don't do it with a liner brush, I actually use the angle brush. And you have to have a really sharp edge on it. If you see here, it's not splayed all out from having been, you know, washed back and forth in your water bowl. This is nice and sharp and clean. Start by rinsing it in water, blot it on your paper towel. And then I take the long tip and I'm going to dip that down in about halfway and actually kind of scoop up a little bit extra on that tip. So when you look at this, you can see that I've got quite a ways in. Now, when I go to set the brush down, all these bottom edges need to touch, not just the tip. So the raw edges, when you set it down and lift, you get a cute little comma mark or a teardrop. So I need more on there. And I'm going to come over to the hat, and I always start in the middle. And you'll notice that on the pattern that there's like a white center design. So come up away from the fur just a little bit, and I tip it off to one direction, set it and lift it, and then do the opposite direction. It's almost like you're making little hearts. And I'm going to do this, and I'll do 2 of them. And then I'm probably going to have to reload. That last one's a little skimpy, so I better redo it. A little more on the brush. Set and lift. And you've got those little teardrops. Reload often. Okay, then I'm just going to keep going across. So I do like the little, almost like little hearts. And don't worry if they're not perfect, but this is how you kind of get that little knitted design. Okay, then the rest of it is going to be Naphthol Red light strokes. Same thing. Scoop that up so that it's halfway across the brush, and when you're setting it down, you set all the bottom edges, set and lift. And let me show you a little bit from the side here. All those little edges have to touch the surface. And you do have to have fresh paint to do this, so don't try to use old yucky stuff that you've had sitting out on your palette. Okay, now I can just go one side all the way up and then come back and do the others. However many will fit.